PMFers, who's got that product market fit? Boo, 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 boo. We're good. We're ready. Doggie B, we are here. How you doing? How you feeling?
I'm doing great, doing great.
Awesome. Awesome. So I'm just going to get right to the questions. This is PMFers, people who have found product market fit. Where did you learn how to build? Like, how did you learn how to build? Even if that's like building blocks or something, it doesn't have to be anything. Very open-ended question. Where did you learn how to build?
Yeah. So like classically, I went to school for engineering, aerospace engineering, and I actually did a stint in kind of defense contracting and whatever. I used to work for a company that built helicopters, and I would do the flight software design, integration, and testing of the software for like that actually controlled the helicopter. So I took a lot of, my design philosophy, if you will, from all that experience, which, in some ways is very different from a lot of other people's perspectives. And, maybe it causes me to develop things in a more slow pace, just due to the years and years it takes to actually ship a project in aerospace. But, I think it's a good way of thinking about and approaching these problems. It's kind of colored my view.
Oh, okay. So now what are some of the first things that you built that like people actually use? Like what was your first foray into PMF in a way?
Yeah, I guess in a way, when I first got involved in the space, it was like mid 2017, and I just kind of was interested in open source, became interested in crypto and like the idea of Ethereum as like a platform for decentralized applications, which was like way more compelling than the first time I heard about Bitcoin, like maybe 5 years before that. And I was like, I'm not really all that interested in what's going on here. So I made a change at the time, quit my job that I was having. I wanted to do something entrepreneurial, like try to build a business. And then this kind of fell into my lap. And at the time I was like super hot. They were like great, like in-person conversations, meetup groups happening. And I just met like so many interesting people and had so many interesting ideas that it really kind of pushed me this direction. And like I did some consulting for a number of years, but the first thing I got involved in that you could say has product market fit was the Viper compiler. So for a number of years, I was kind of one of the head maintainers of the compiler project. Now it's kind of Big Tech Sucks on Twitter. He's a great, very technical person involved with that project now, kind of leading it. But the Viper compiler, which originally was a Vitalik project that he kind of birthed and got some other people involved with, but stewarded through the community throughout a number of years, and now you could say obviously has a level of product market fit, quote unquote, in terms of important DeFi projects and such using it, including Yearn, which was kind of my introduction of Viper into DeFi.
Are you still bullish on Viper? Like if you had to sit down and build something right now,
absolutely.
would you use Viper instead of Solidity? Okay.
I have not I would say there is like, so Yearn V2 is the thing I kind of worked on, and we use Solidity as a base for like the extension system of that.
Just because other builders are going to want.
Yeah, that's a big major reason, but also like Viper at the time did not have like a good extension story. Like how do you take a piece of code, use it as a base and build off of it? So that was the reason at the time. Now like Viper does have an extension system. So like the reasons to use Solidity over Viper, I would say these days is basically just popularity. There's no dev tooling is great. It has most of the feature set that you would need for a large project. I think it's there finally after like 7 years.
This does like lean into the what is your stack question though, and that's kind of the next thing. So your on-chain product market fit is Yearn V2.
Yeah.
And your stack is probably very Viper oriented. What does it
Very
look like? What are you
Pythonic.
using
Yeah.
Python? Okay, to orchestrate and deploy contracts, to test contracts. What kind of framework are you using?
Yeah. So like I initially got involved. I was super bullish on Python just because it's like, the most used language in the world now. It used to be JavaScript, but kind of Python took over because of all this AI stuff. And it's a really great fit for the ecosystem because it's like very data heavy, data scientist stack. It's very security heavy. There's a lot of security engineers that use Python on the daily. It's a great way to approach developing projects. And originally I was like fooling around with stuff with Web3 Pi directly, tried to build frameworks, a number of times. That's kind of what I do now. And at the time of like Yearn V2, Brownie was like super big, and Brownie is used by Curve and Yearn, although it's kind of been just in a maintenance only holding pattern for a number of years now. So like we switched some people to using Ape. Some people use another like kind of lower level project called Titanoboa, which is a dev. Yeah, it's a dev tool like specifically for Viper that you can write like more direct code in the style of, let's say, Foundry, where you're kind of ignoring the transaction overhead and the signing and the blockchain aspects of things, and you're just kind of very deep directly like interacting with the EVM, right? So like very popular these days to use Foundry for everything.
But you wouldn't, like, if right now you had to deploy a quick DeFi protocol, you had a week to build it and you had to ship it, your stack would be Viper and Ape maybe, or something.
Yeah, Viper and Ape.
Okay.
Yeah, I like using Ape because it like replicates the real blockchain environment. We have a Titanoboa plugin that we built that kind of wraps using Ape because it is a lot faster to use Boa, just because it's like not doing transaction signing, it's not doing block sealing, it's not doing most of the things that like in Hardhat, for example. Like that's the big difference between like Hardhat Foundry is Foundry just doesn't do that stuff. So it's faster because it's ignoring some of the overhead of maintaining a local blockchain to test with.
Cool. Awesome. Okay. So we've got the stack out of the way. Now let's talk about that hypothetical thing that you would ship in a couple of weeks. Like, how do you go about ideating or just even coming up with ideas? Where do they hit you? Is it like a shower thought thing, or is it like a sit down and find it thing? Where do ideas find you? How do they emerge?
Yeah, probably more shower thought. Like, I consistently have just random ideas, and I feel like my favorite thing about Viper is it's very like my favorite thing about Python in general and like Viper specifically is like the very short span from like thoughts and ideas to paper, right? It lets you move very quickly and like prototype something very quickly. And I've always liked that about Viper versus like Solidity, where it's like I'm constantly having to think about like, oh, like what will the compiler screw me over with this time if I write this code? And like I'm not really worried about that when I write Viper, which allows me to like stay in the idea longer, right? Cool. Instead of thinking about like, oh, I have to think about saving gas in this way or working with, low level Yule or whatever, right?
No, thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so it's you are thinking up random ideas and then you're implementing them in Python, and Python helps you quickly kind of like dog it out and test it. Yeah. How do you like validate it? Is it putting it in front of people? Is it, it compiles so it's validated? How do you go about taking a new idea and dinking with it to the point of validating it where maybe there's something here I need to ship?
Yeah, I would say there's a difference between like personal validation, which is like, I'm happy with how this thing works for my own reasons. And then like the process I went through with something like Yearn V2, that was like a multi-month process. It was an existing community. So there was like a community governance aspect to it. Do people like this design? Is this something they're into, and that leads more into like my, my prior experience of like shipping things more slowly, kind of getting stakeholders to agree. Like there's a process you have to follow there. And I think there's something in between. If you're launching a new project, you don't have to worry about the social layer, but you should get it in front of people and try to have, I was very fortunate to have the Yearn developer community like work with me and give me feedback on the idea based on how they've been using like Yearn V1, for example, and kind of we expanded from that, right?
You almost had product market fit to start, and you were working backwards with everything else.
Yeah, like I think like taking existing projects and making them like much more scalable and more successful is like more of my skill set than like launching a brand new thing. So I've always been like really interested in like how do we like 10x or 100x this great idea and make it more scalable, and that's the kind of thing I was really happy with Yearn V2 is we took a great idea that Andre had, kind of figured out how to scale it much better, and ended up scaling up to like $6.5 billion of TVL at the peak, kind of during DeFi summer craze. Yeah, so like it worked out pretty well.
So we've got our idea. I mean, you almost have it validated from the beginning, but and I think you've already alluded to this, but just to be clear, like what does your testing process look like, or even auditing? Like what do you do to get that thing on main and feel confident about it?
Yeah, I'm much more heavy on like doing a lot of your own testing and like being very confident in the code base before you go through an auditing step. And I would say like auditing specifically, like, because we had this like prior like product market fit protocol that we were replacing or augmenting, whatever. Like I knew that we should get an audit at, a point in time when we're ready to like fully launch this, and we should do some level of testing before that. Like even I think before that audit period, we had some like production mainnet vaults that were available, where to look. And some people did like play with them, and it was just like always with the caveat of like, this isn't the final code. We're not really, like super confident that there isn't a bug in it, but you're welcome to play, welcome to have fun with us exploring the kind of the boundaries of it. And I would always, for a new person, I would always recommend doing some sort of trial or beta phase on like production, and just like keep the expectations low for that. In either, using some sort of like code based limits, or just limiting limiting one aspect of the scale of it, just to make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, which, through that process, we maybe had a couple of releases of code fixing things that didn't work quite well, or maybe changing features and how they functioned in order to get there. But that is always a good use of time, especially when you're like in the holding pattern waiting for the audit time slot. Like you got that time anyway, so use it.
Interesting. I was going to ask about like, some special, let's say you're pushing a prototype to production to dink around with it. You somehow kind of kneecap that thing a little bit so it can't explode. I think you kind of alluded to that. Maybe you put some limits on something. Maybe you put some kind of circuit breaker. What kind of, I don't know. You did try that and it seemed to work a little bit? Some kind of limits?
Yeah, like there was a natural fit for how to introduce a limit into like the Yearn code base. But like, let's say, for example, Curve had and still has like a time limited like kill switch in their code base. So like when a pool is first launched, there's like some sort of like 1 month or so delay, which a security multi-sig can shut it down. And then after that, it becomes immutable, like it can't be shut down after that point. So like, that's a good way of thinking about it. Like, is there something inherent to the operation of it where like I have capability to kind of shut it down? Or if not, is there do I want to have something where like I can shut it down? You can even have like more temporary code, although like I would not, like don't add too much like temporary code, because then you're gonna have to like reconfigure it for an audit, reconfigure it for like larger success. But just think about like how does the code operate, and how can you make sure like you have some capability of like stopping a bad action if it's operating poorly. So like Yearn V2 code base has like a deposit limit shutdown, and like a lot of the attacks against vaults are usually these like cycling attacks where deposit, inflate share price, withdrawal. So if you can shut down one leg of it, you can prevent a problem from spiraling out of control. So that was like a nice capability.
Okay, that makes sense. I love that too. Like testing and prod with some, kill switches or even some fuses. And if anything moves too fast in any direction, the whole thing's goes to zero or something. So you know that it's not, or everyone gets their money back somehow. Or something like that.
That's kind of my intuition. Like think about the ways that the code can fail, or even the system can fail. Like code operates as expected, but think about like what are potential exceptional scenarios that you may expect can happen, even if you don't know exactly how they might happen. Like just think ahead of like, maybe money might get withdrawn due to some bug that we don't want to get withdrawn. Like what should happen in that scenario? Have a plan, even go so far as having a script that you can execute really quickly to react to that scenario. That's a big suggestion I always give, whether it's a Foundry script or, like with Ape, like you can ship scripts alongside a project that you can just run, right? Have something pre-planned that you can execute quickly in case of a bad scenario, right?
That's a really good point. Like some kind of eject script that's just sitting on your machine ready to go, or maybe everyone on your team has it. And
you're writing deployment scripts.
Someone can get
write
to
a shutdown script.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Cool. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Artificial intelligence, AI. It's a big thing. You said the AI is really kind of pushing Python code, which is cool too. How do you use AI to build? How does it inform your stack? How does it inform your ideas? Where does AI come into all of this, and where are you using it?
Personally, like when I use AI sometimes for like research purposes, or like even there's been a few like algorithms that I've tried to develop that are like complex enough where I'm kind of having the conversation with the LLM about like what's the best way to do this. And this is mostly Python code, which it has like an enormous corpus of Python code, and most of these LLMs they're usually best with it. So I'll talk through an algorithm with it. I'll do some research with it. I haven't used it a lot for actual coding, mostly because like I want to set up a system that it's like entirely local first if I were going to go that route, because that's the bread and butter. You want to protect that. But I think it's really interesting, and it's also like kind of what I built my whole company around, that I founded even like 4 years ago. I knew that like the ability to work with blockchain systems, you need something that can stay awake, alive 24/7 to react. Like person can't do that. So the end all be all to me, and I think we see this, is that we'll have automated bot activity, and AI kind of naturally feeds with that, like having like, some more advanced detection capabilities, some more advanced management capabilities for operating at scale. That's like a big part of why I chose Python for the stack, is like kind of get into that and build for that use case.
Yeah, the idea of the script that could, force withdraw everybody, the eject script.
Yeah,
you could be
think of that as one capability.
Yeah,
right. Think
imagine
of that as one
was an AI
capability.
agent that's like, look at all this meta information about the contract. Maybe here's a couple URLs you can go to and look at it on Etherscan. Do this every 15 seconds. And then if you detect some major anomaly, run this script as one of your actions. And it's just kind of
and
observing.
Yeah, the thing we've been working on for like the past 2 years is basically like that loop, right? To be able to develop automated capabilities listening to chain data, like contract log events and stuff. And like when something happens, do some Python logic, even an AI inference call. What do you think about this? Is this a risk? If you can even ask it like, given all this context, give me a level of risk between 0 and 1. And if it's above a certain level, then you just like automatically fire off this like kill switch capability. Those are the types of things that you need to like deploy into prod these days, because like you are not capable of reacting quick enough. And even to some extent you want to avoid it, but like the best you can do is react to it if you can't avoid it, right?
So are you bullish on AI agents? Like, what's your feeling of where AI agents are now and what's going to happen in the future?
I think AI agents, like as a concept, needs to be broken down a little bit. And like I'm fundamentally bullish that like AI control is required for any of this stuff to function at scale. Like I think of AI agents as this like control loop of monitoring and action. And you can think about even they're like organizing in multiple actions, and they're able to like pick and choose what to do or what to listen to based on an evolving conversation you have. And I think that's what most people want when they think of AI agent. They want an entity that can have a conversation with, that can evolve like a monitoring control strategy for their project, or even like if you're talking about like in portfolio investment, like involve a portfolio thesis and kind of implement a strategy in real time. Like that's what people want to do with the agents. It's not so much like talk to it on Twitter. They want it to work for them, right? And to have it work for them, you need to kind of have like really well-defined actions they can do that they can pick from, and they understand what those actions are. And it can't just be like, oh, give this AI that can randomly hallucinate things access to a private key, right? You need to have it like defined actions that work well and are tested. Maybe they're scripts, maybe they're like continuous inner loop function calls, like, when this happens, do this. And you just have the agent kind of evolve the conversation of like the collection of actions and the collection of scripts that you're running, and be able to configure them in real time. Like that's kind of the outer loop the AI agent provides.
And the AI agent as a Twitter bot is definitely overhyped right now. And they're not just here to tweet. Like you can have them do so much more complex stuff. And
that could be the user interface people want. You imagine having
a lot of people,
like a DAO, right? Yeah. Like you imagine having a DAO. Imagine there was a DAO controlled Twitter account.
To fuck around with MetaMask that's on the wrong chain ID, and you have to go make all these suggestions, or would you rather just tell the bot, "I vote yes"? It'd be way easier. Yeah.
Or like even the AI agent is like listening to and responding to like real-time threat intel from people, hashtag adding it on Twitter or something. Like if enough people say something, it'll like direct its attention towards it. And like maybe that's the way to go.
Cool. Neat. So you're not using Cursor. Is that right? Like you're not using
I'm kind of old school. I use NeoVim, and I know there's a way to connect that kind of stuff with NeoVim, but I just haven't done it yet.
I will say, man, Cursor feels like magic to me. I started using it and I haven't looked back, and I don't write a lot of code anymore, which I think in your mind is probably scary. You don't want to get to that point, I'm guessing.
Well, for me, like I find the process of code, like the manual feel of writing code, to be like somewhat therapeutic, and also like somewhat allowing my mind to think as I work. Whereas like I do use it to like help me figure out how to solve a problem, or like help me work through an algorithm design or something. But like I'm always thinking like based on the answer it gives me, do I trust that answer? And is it exactly what I want? And like usually I'm like trying to distill the questions I asked to like more of a minimal working example. Like, given the scenario, like give me the best solution. And then I'm like, okay, that's what it's telling me, but I need to integrate it with all this other crap. And I know how that works because like I have the high level architecture, and it's just kind of helping me solve like lower level problems. And I don't think these AI coder agents are quite at the point of like having a full high level architectural understanding of things yet. And
And
some
that
of
seems to
it's just,
be like the
yeah.
theme.
Sorry.
So far,
Yeah.
talking to PMFers, this
Yeah.
high level architecture is really the important piece of how to build a product that people will eventually use. Is you
Yeah.
have to have this high level architecture in mind, and how things talk to things, and what happens when this happens, and just the boxes and how they line up. And if you can do that and do that well, whether you're using AI or not, like it's a process to put all that together, and my mind can't just spit one of those out. It has to kind of iterate and draw things and figure out,
Yeah.
I have a
And there's also
whiteboard
like
back there. Yeah.
just
Go ahead.
ego and process. Like
Oh yeah.
I always think about that like Rick Rubin thing, that gif that like all I have is my taste. And I feel like my taste in code and how I want to see it implemented is like a little bit there too. Is like, I don't want to let go of having like quality code yet and just leave it to an AI to do. But that's just a personal preference.
I like how there's a yet there too. You kind of know it's coming eventually.
Yeah. I know it'll get there, and I would love to have like a scenario of like, here's my design system, here's my like coding standards, and it understands that and is able to produce like more high quality code that like I think what ultimately it needs to do is have some logical evaluation. And like, that's the thing that's missing from all of this is like, does the thing actually do what I want it to do? And only a person can really do that right now. So like, it can generate code, but does the code work? That's up to you to figure out.
And I think we'll see some of this complexity in the underlying architecture of an AI agent, where you give it an overall command and it's like, okay, my overall command is this, but I'm going to kind of work on a couple things over here. And like you said, like it'll try something, but then it needs to evaluate that and see it from the big picture and maybe try it 2 or 3 different ways and compare it. And I don't think it's there yet, but like, it's close. I feel like if you and I can think about it right now and we could see the light at the end of the tunnel, it's not far away from someone implementing it and actually having this sort of almost like programmer buddy next to you. That's like,
I've been
just giving it commands.
I've been thinking about it from like a tools perspective, like giving the AI agent like tools. And that's how most of these, like at least the ones outside of crypto I've worked, is like you give it a tool set, it knows how to like understand when and how to use that tool effectively. And then the conversation you have is like, hey, I want to do this. And it's like, okay, well, here are 10 different ways we can do it. Which one do you like? Okay, you pick that one. Here's what I need to understand from you to configure this tool to work properly. And then you kind of make it through that conversation and then deploy that like tool into production. And then like, it'll, maybe it could listen or respond to, or like convert failures into like a higher level, like, oh, this thing was misconfigured, or this is some sort of runtime failure, or oh, it's like, oh, you can ignore that. I don't know. I think that comes very close in the future, like being able to convert this lower level crap into like, this needs your attention, or I'm okay, I got this, we just need to fix this one problem.
And there's a lot, even at the human layer. If we imagine the CEO, CTO with the idea that needs to be shipped, talking to the head developer for the first time, the CEO, CTO hasn't thought through everything yet. They just know what needs to happen. And the developer can start thinking through things and start asking like really smart questions back to the CEO. What about this? What about that? What happens if this? And then that sparks this whole conversation of, oh shit, yeah, we've got this edge case, so that we need to change it so it does this. And I think that'll be agents soon, but we'll see. It could take a while. We'll see.
That's my ideal scenario, is like, I'm good at having those conversations, and ideally would like to work with something that is able to have that conversation with me, and I can trust it to like take my feedback and implement it well. Right.
Heck yeah. So along the like path of ideas and ideating and testing ideas, yours is kind of different because it was almost like your product market fit was there and you were working backwards. But maybe just in general, if you were about to launch your next thing and ship something that will get users and people will use. We've gone through your ideation process, but how do you know when an idea it's time to like let the idea go? Like you've come up with the idea, you're really excited about it, you've tried to validate it in multiple angles. it's like, it's 2 years later and it's just you still on Twitter, still shilling it, and no one else is using it. Like, is it time to let the product idea go? And what is your process around kind of letting those ideas go?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes it's hard to realize like where that line is, and you just got to think like, what is the minimal aspect of this thing that will prove it works the way I thought it would? And
If
what
you're 2
are
years in, you're way too far. You should have
yeah,
shipped something very minimal and found out quickly. Yeah.
yeah, I think that was the thing I had to learn, like, giving my prior experience. Like, I worked on projects at my old job that like took 6 years to launch. Like, there is not an easy way to do it in a shorter amount of time frame. Like, you just got to take the time and do it, right?
When you're controlling helicopters, it's okay to take 6 years too.
Well, it's just like you have to build the thing,
Yeah.
and it takes a long time to build something physical like that costs $50 million.
Lots of hardware. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you have to do like ground testing and hardware testing and all this testing before you even fully integrate the thing to actually see if it all works at scale. You have simulations, you have models. There's a lot of work that goes into it, and I think one benefit of like crypto being like a purely software-based phenomenon is that you can do testing a lot more quickly into that cycle. And I think like you got to mix like the seriousness of a project. You have to kind of trade off the seriousness of a project or the seriousness of the stage of the project you're at with the level of validation you're doing against like a real, environment. Right.
And do you risk anything? Let's say there's a very serious project, even Yearn V2, like it's serious, billions of dollars serious. Yeah. Do you see lots of value by still putting small prototypes out that test little pieces of it? Or
there was a period when we launched it, and like maybe there was like 2 or 3 beta releases prior to that like launch. And then there's probably like over the next 2 years, I did the first initial cuts of releases, but then it was like other people as I sort of pivoted into a new project. But like there was probably 20 something releases of that code afterwards. And we had this like deployment process where assets would be moved. And that ultimately ended up being one of the features people didn't like because you had to migrate things every time. But having that process in mind too, like how does this thing evolve over time? Do I have a strategy for deploying upgraded code, deploying new features to it that works with the immutability of that system? I don't really like to use like upgradable proxies too much. I would rather have like an explicit migration process and have people go through that process, and so they can kind of pick and choose when they want to move. Which I think is important. But yeah, like you just have to think through that, because there's always, with any software project, there's always going to need to be a fix somewhere. There's always going to need to be an update. Just things change over time. Your understanding of the problem changes over time. So you're going to need to evolve that, right?
You said that users hated migrating. How did you go about, like, how did you learn that? How did you learn feedback from your users?
There was like Yearn was a little bigger than most projects that like are starting new out of the gate, where you're very close to your users because like you operate a community or whatever. So like I would hear feedback from people. Some of the user base, I would say like there was 2 types of users. There was like the strategy creators. They had very direct feedback with me because they were actually going and implementing the strategies. So they would tell me like what they needed, how to make it work. And then there was like users in Discord, users in Twitter that were maybe complaining about certain things. I think the migrations issue was fairly obvious. Like nobody wants to do an action to move from an old thing to a new thing if they can avoid it. So we came up with kind of a hack of like having the old strategy invest into the new strategy, and then we would have to like hack around the fees to make sure they weren't like getting charged double fees for doing that. So that's kind of what we ended up implementing. You have to think recursively in that way. Like you do this thing, you add a new version of it. Like how does the version interact with the old one? Even like Uniswap is a great example. There are 4 iterations of Uniswap now. every single one of them actually operates independently, right? It's not like everyone upgraded to V4 all of a sudden. It's like V2 people still use, V3.
V2 still beautiful.
Yeah, V1 even, like
Yeah.
there's like 2 pairs on V1. I think like the Unisocks and like
Which is probably written in Viper, right?
it might have been. The V1 was written in Viper. But yeah, like the Unisocks, and then there's like the old version of MakerDAO DAI that was put into emergency shutdown before the multi-collateral DAI went live. That one, I think those 2 markets are still like the most liquid on V1, right?
That's cool. So okay, there's this interesting thing where as you're building your product, you have some personas in your mind of these users, and your strategy builders are going to be like more technical. And so you're thinking of the user interface for them. And as you're making decisions, you're kind of imagining that strategy person getting in here and implementing a strategy, and you know how technical they are. So when something is a little bit technical, you kind of imagine like, will that person figure this out? And then on the user side, you have a different persona. This is more of an ape that wants to get in. They don't know a ton of things.
Yeah.
And you're thinking of those decisions as them. So you're already like kind of like have these 2 make-believe people that you're trying to service with the software. I think that's a really good way to do it. You lean into that? I mean, is that resonating?
Yeah, that was one of the things that like I learned during doing like all these like consulting for random like weird projects from the ICO era that I ended up talking to, and then I kind of developed is like go through a user story exercise. Like who are the stakeholders in the system? What level of knowledge and access do they have? And you work through that when you're building out an architecture like design of your system. Like, maybe I think the Yearn thing is maybe a little bit unique in that like the strategy creators, we end up making an SDK for them to subclass and use in their own Solidity code. So like that was very technical, right?
Yep.
And we had to like test different avenues that they might go and approach that problem and make sure we constrain the interface properly and all that kind of stuff. But even like older projects, like I'd like to think of, you have a general user who is somebody that hasn't interacted with it before. They do an action, they become like another type of user that has specific actions that they can do. You maybe have like an admin class user or something that has like or even like a validator user, like some sort of person with stake at play or something. Like map out all the stakeholders, map out all the actions they can do, map out like even the incentives they have with those actions.
Yeah.
Right. I love, that's my favorite thing about like designing like smart contracts is like thinking through incentive design. Right. That's my favorite thing. So yeah, like think through all that, write it down. And that's the thing that you really need to get like good broad feedback on. Like, does this make sense as a whole? You can do that in parallel with just like sloppily writing up some code to try the idea, see if you can implement it. But like, that's the thing I would try to write in advance of like an audit, like a serious launch of that project. And you'll find that even auditors like that thing because it gives them a higher level understanding of your design goal, which always helps them in understanding the project. Because if you just hand them a bunch of Solidity code, they're going to be like, okay, now I have to figure out what you were trying to do based on these like archaic scrabblings and Solidity.
But if you can follow the money and the incentives, then that's a lot clearer.
Yeah, I call this like a design specification. So develop a design specification as like a markdown document. List the actors, list the assets, list the interactions those actors are able to perform. That is a great building tool, right? I can look at that. I can analyze the code against that. I can analyze the tests against that to see if the tests are testing the scenarios that I laid out. And then you kind of have this like triangular relationship between your specification, your code, and your tests where, something doesn't quite match up. Now you have 2 other things to compare it to and figure out which one's wrong.
That's great. And it'll help you later on communicate to auditors and everything else if you have this document ready to go early.
Yeah,
Can we?
because if you don't develop something like that, the auditor is going to spend time
Yeah,
building that in their heads,
it's
and you
going to
can save
cost
them
you
time.
money.
You
Yeah.
get a better result, right?
Can we explore just the incentive design just a little bit? So you have these strategists, these strategy builders that are
Yeah,
allowed to build these things, and it sounds like Solidity. So you, even though your protocol is written in Viper, you have these people that can come in and use their whole stack and do anything completely different as long as it's probably composable and inherits some of your
yeah.
interfaces.
And ultimately, a lot of those ideas led into ERC 4626, which I co-authored.
Is
And
that the
the idea
vault?
was, yeah, that's the vault standard. And the
Okay.
idea was with V3, who somebody else ended up designing, adopting some of the code they liked from V2, use the 4626 standard as that interface between like the lower level strategies that like do a specific action and this like higher level Yearn system, which aggregates multiple strategies, right? Both of them ended up using the standard, but they used them in different ways. And that like interface is much more strongly tested across the ecosystem. There's like an A16Z project that kind of formally specifies some properties of vaults, and you'll get the benefit of kind of like the ecosystem play by picking some of those common standards.
To zoom in though on the incentive, I'm guessing there's some kind of fee setting, and you're
Yeah.
giving a certain percentage to the person who created the strategy, and you're trying to balance. Don't give them too
Yep.
much, but give them enough that they're incentivized to do that. Is that right? Can you take us through that thought process of, how do you tweak that little fee
Yeah.
mechanism?
In V2, it was highly manual. It was like there was kind of a global like 2 and 20 type model that was developed, and then we like change things over time and whatever. And I think with V3, they changed it to be essentially like the strategy owner charge their personal fee through the 4626 interface. Like, you do a deposit and you can do a withdrawal at any time, and kind of the difference between the deposit and withdrawal is inclusive of fees. It's inclusive of any other considerations. And the like return rate you get is just, the difference between those two over the amount of time that it's been, right?
I had to look up what 2 and 20 is also, but that's a common hedge fund fee structure
Model. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Heck yeah. And
Yeah.
you could,
Skeuomorphism. I was kind of
bring it
thinking
in.
skeuomorphically of like,
Yep.
what is Yearn? What is its purpose? How does it function? And borrowed some concepts from, what I think it was like, and built that into the code base. Right.
And with the incentive mechanism, you hope it works, but you can tweak it too. If you launch it and no one's creating strategies, you can like turn up that percentage, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Well, I would say like with V2, there was some explicit designs, and those ended up being like governance parameters. And yes, we could modify them, but they're very sticky. And if you,
It takes like
go
a
to
token
governance,
vote. Yeah.
yeah, if you go to governance and say, hey, we want to change this from this to this, people are going to have opinions, and that's going to be hard. And that's much easier to implement and easier to like consider in a whole versus something that's more dynamic, like with how V3 did it, where it's like the lower level strategies all have their own different way that they implement their own fees, and it's completely dynamic. And it's like, we're just gonna add or remove things from this like higher level like multi aggregate vault based on what we like from the lower level, based on their own fee structure and how they set everything up. And it's a lot more to consider when you're designing a system, but it's more flexible because it's like you're relying on the incentives of other people and like kind of hooking into those incentives. And you just got to balance that in a design, because it can make things a lot more complicated if you like make everything dynamic, but at the same time, it's more flexible.
Okay, I got a few kind of existential closing questions. Imagining that new builder who's coming in, what are things that when you first got in, you wish you knew, and you had to be in the trenches to learn, but what are some of those lessons that you wish you knew when you first got in that you had to learn the hard way?
I don't know. Here's one thing I found interesting. I don't know if I more experienced this from watching somebody, and that's kind of the benefit of working on dev tooling is you get to see everyone else kind of learning too. And one thing I found super interesting lately is basically like, what does go-to-market strategy look like for crypto, right? Does it look like going on Twitter and shouting nonstop endlessly? Having a web front end that you can go and use and like getting people to use it? Or does it look like getting MEV bots to notice your protocol and use that? Does it look like automation? Does it look like, this is kind of the stuff I was really compelled with. But we had a project that was using Ape and using Silverback, which is our like real-time system. And they built like a very basic arbitrage bot against their protocol because they had this you have to arbitrage between their their leverage protocol versus the underlying Uniswap pool to make it function in order to make sure that like the prices stay in line. And they just built a random arbitrage bot that kind of like demonstrated the opportunity. And in doing so, like a generalized MEV like front runner bot like noticed it and started picking it up. And that took 6 hours from the time they launched that bot to getting adoption of the protocol, quote unquote, from this important subset of actors to make it function. Took 6 hours versus weeks. I don't even think it's possible anymore to like go on Twitter and like get a serious user base. There's just so much stuff out there. You really got to like show it. You can't just talk about it anymore.
Wow. Okay, so the bots are watching all these transactions and if they can make money off of them. And instead of getting on Twitter and saying, here's the bot that you can run to make money and it's all open source, go do it and make money, you actually just trigger it a few times on chain and show that the money flows. And then that's all the bots need to learn from and implement their own strategies to do that.
I think it's a balance. Like those,
you do all the other things too.
Yeah. Like doing arbitrage, doing liquidations, like they're dedicated actors already in the ecosystem that will look for opportunities like that. And you just demonstrate it to them, they'll pick it up. And then there's like the demand side, like the user base demand. That's what you should focus on, like building up a user base that is interested in what you're actually doing. And then like, the MEV and all that stuff kind of comes along for the ride in coalescence with you building up a user base, right? So like focus on the thing that actually drives the outcome of your protocol and what you want to see happen, instead of just like trying to get everything to work for everyone all at once and like giving all these dev examples for how to do it. Like focus on the right users in the right way, and those users might be bots. So
that's I just did a PMFers with Zach Herring, and he was talking about you've got two sides to your market, and one of them is usually a lot harder to get people in than the other, and you need to focus on that one first. And in this case, you're saying the users that are actually using the protocol are the most important, and you need to make their UX super smooth, and the people that are creating strategies less and less.
I would say most projects end up with either like a 2 or 3-sided marketplace, right? And the way you attract like one of those, types of people is different than the others, and you should use the best tool for that job. So like if you have some sort of more like technical role that is usually fulfilled by an automated system, you should promote it to an automated system. You shouldn't promote it to the person running it because they're not going to pay attention. Right?
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then users, you want as little headache as possible.
Yeah. You invest the time into a great front end, into a great experience for that, like, let's say more retail or more like, less sophisticated. I wouldn't say less sophisticated, but like less technical user. Like you develop the tools for them to use it and spend your time on the marketing and outreach to that group of people versus spending your time on outreach to like, a market making firm who, unless you make a deal with them, they don't give a shit. Like just have them just demonstrate the opportunity and they will come.
Yep.
That's the easy part.
That makes sense. Okay, so building on blockchain, ideas, shower thoughts, all of that together. What kinds of things actually belong on a blockchain? What kinds of things are we deploying here?
I think I've always been like super interested in, let's say, the DeFi use case for blockchains. I think it's a very obvious set of product market fit for Ethereum at large, right? I am more interested in like what are other things we can scale into that, or what are other types of ideas, other types of projects that we can build with that as a building block. Because like the one thing I say is like DeFi has that product market fit, but like it cannot exist in a vacuum. Like it needs valuable collateral to work. So my favorite example of that is like ENS, right? Like you have ENS, they've created a valuable asset, the ENS domain. It's not a DeFi project, but you can use a valuable asset in DeFi. You can like leverage against a very valuable name for a particular reason. You can even use that as a building block for something else, right? Like maybe you have like a subdomain type system that is tied to, owning, amount of shit coins or something. And it's like, okay, you can leverage that domain record now because it owns, actually, I think, what's the thing that F layer, they do exactly this. They have the creator of the coin tied up in an NFT, and that NFT controls like the dev flow or something of that token. And so the ownership of that NFT is now important, and you can leverage that into something else, right?
And ENS also
yeah
gives you a name for an address, so those end users can interact with something that's much better UX, and they're earning revenue because you have to like stake and pay for these names. So there's a lot there. ENS
like
is a great
ENS as a
example of good
protocol
project.
has its own like revenue streams and stuff, and I'm sure they'll investigate further like how they might best use those revenue streams, right? Like and build an ecosystem, which is most projects ended up looking pretty meta of like, we're building an ecosystem. Well, an ecosystem of what? How does the ecosystem function? It's decentralized. Okay, what does that mean? Who are the actors at play? How do they all work together? Like,
where are the incentives?
Where are the incentives? Where is this going?
Yep,
that's the fun part.
And an interesting thing about ENS is a second and third ENS is only just going to weaken the first ENS, whereas sometimes the second and third thing makes like the whole ecosystem and network effects better. Mm-hmm. But ENS is maybe one of those things that just needs to be like written into the protocol at this point or something, or kind of king made as this is the naming service that all apps should use. And if you're going to have a name in your app, you should just use ENS, and you should not even send people to ENS. You should have a little pencil next to the name. And if there's not a name, they can click it and type in their name. And that actually goes and registers an ENS name and everything you need to do, or maybe a subdomain, but it doesn't even leave your site. It basically is like using this component of Web3 of this naming system as just one little element of this, greater overall app or experience.
Yeah. I think specifically for ENS, it gets king made like HTTP got king made. Like it just becomes the protocol people use for a certain thing, gets built into browsers, it get built into operating systems, it get built into like client integration libraries for different languages like that. That's the supremacy use case, I guess, or supremacy like end game for that. I don't know.
All right. So what about it seems like building on Ethereum, anyone can do it. Anyone can write some Solidity. Anyone can write some Viper. Like I can take any given coder and have them write me a multi-sig, and they can probably almost figure it out. But it seems like the people who get product market fit are a special cracked elite few. Do you think that Ethereum is only for a few elite cracked devs, or is it going to be this more general purpose? Anybody can get together and write up a quick escrow contract and put it into motion.
I don't know if I necessarily think like being an elite is a requirement for any level of success. That's, one of the things we hope to build here is like an egalitarian system where if you have some like good idea that's done well, then people will notice it. I think the part where having like deeper connections is important is in terms of like marketing and like mind share. So that'll always be the situation. You just have to like build great relationships with people in the ecosystem to get the level of mind share and the attention to make something succeed, especially at this point in the game. I feel like up until maybe a year or 2 years ago, you could have gotten attention just by having a great idea. But at this point, there's so much stuff that you have to like meme yourself into relevancy, right?
Yep. You hit on something there that I think a lot of past guests have talked about, and it's friends. Like when you get into Ethereum, even if they're fake friends on crypto Twitter and you're just following them and that counts as a friend, friends are super important, and making friends and having people you could bounce things off of, and having the cabal to go talk to and chat or whatever. Do you double down on that? Like, I think friends are super important, but what do you think?
I do think friends are super important. I think I was listening to the episode you did with Joe DeLong. Like having friends review code is like a very key thing if we're talking to developers here. But I also think a large part of the industry is based on like mutual investment.
Yeah, we're all in it together.
Yeah.
We're all dangerously exposed.
But also like specifically like a lot of your best advocates and your best critics will be people that are like deeply involved in what you're doing, have a level of investment in what you're doing. I think the best like non VC examples of that I've seen are like people involved in a community, and kind of like invested themselves into that. I saw that with Yearn, just like, Andre made something exist and they kind of let other people play with it and let it see what happened from that. And they built a huge like community that like went very strong for a number of years, and you can kind of leverage that. I got a huge amount of value from like those relationships we built together in that community, and that helped me reviewing code, that helped me getting things to prod, that helped me working through ideating things, like hugely important. And there was a whole aspect of people involved of outreach and getting users and that kind of stuff that I didn't even see, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, like you're going to create relationships. It's always good to make friends, but it's great to make friends that are in it with you and want to work with you and help you. And don't be afraid to ask. I think that's a thing that especially myself, if one thing I had to learn was like, don't be afraid to ask for people, for their support, for just bounce an idea off them. And a lot of what makes a successful project these days are the friends and company you keep. So always keep that in mind.
Friends, yeah, and haters too. If you don't have at least one or two haters, you don't have enough friends yet either. Like you need
great
more exposure. Yeah,
you need a great hater. Great hater that kind of is a critic, but allows you to be better.
Something right. Yep, exactly. Yeah. Okay, last question. I got to jump in a minute. What is your superpower? A super weird question, but I always finish with that. Do you see yourself as having a superpower, and what is it?
I think the thing I'm best at is like analyzing something that's working and try to make it better. That's always been something like my go-to when I get involved in something is like, how does this thing work? Understand it, understand the tweaks it needs to be better. And that's kind of what I focus on. So yeah, I mean, just understand something completely how it works, and then like try to like question those assumptions and question the things you learned in order to do it better.
Heck yeah. All right, man. Thank you. Doggie B, PMFers. I think this is episode 3. Thank you, Doggie B, for being here. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.